The California National Primate Research Center is part of the National Primate Research Centers program and is dedicated to improving human and animal health. My name is Carlos Villatoro, and this is Monkey Talk, the official podcast of the California National Primate Research Center at UC Davis. Today on Monkey Talk, my guest is Dr. Jessica Vandeleest. Dr. Vandeleest and her colleagues in the lab of Dr. Brenda McCowan recently published a paper on how uncertainty in social rank affects the health of monkeys. Tell me, Dr. Vandeleest, how did you come up with this study?
Well, this is part of a much larger study that we're doing. In general, in our lab, we're interested in how large social networks influence the health of the individuals in those networks. And so this is one component of that larger study where we're looking at differences in social status.
So our rhesus macaques are housed in large outdoor field corrals, each about the size of a football field. They serve as great opportunities for our researchers to observe social behavior in a natural environment and also study the stages of development in the monkeys. Each corral houses naturalistic demographics of infants to geriatric animals in their extended family groups. How many monkeys did you look at for this study?
In this study, we looked at 3 social groups, and in each of those social groups, you have anywhere from probably 120 to anywhere up to 175 individuals in those groups. And we were only looking at the adults, so that's still somewhere around 50 to 70 animals or 100 animals in each group.
So was it just adult males or females that you were looking at?
Well, we look at both males and females in these groups because they both participate in aggression in the cages, and they both are involved in the hierarchy and kind of interactions with each other.
And what time period are we talking about? When did you start observing the monkeys?
Yeah, so this study's been going on for a couple of years now. I think our first cage we observed in 2013, and for each cage we watched them for a period of 6 weeks as part of a baseline. And when we watch them, we're out there 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, recording what they're doing in the cages, who's aggressing who, how they're responding, who's hanging out with who, and those types of things, so that we get an understanding of how they interact in their social group.
So can you tell me a little bit more about what precisely you're looking for, what type of behaviors you're looking for in the monkeys?
Sure. In this particular study, we were interested in what are called agonistic interactions, which are essentially fights or aggression. So we're looking for status relationships. We're looking at 2 animals, one of which that will aggress the other one, and that could be anything from a threat face, which is an open mouth face, or a lunge, or it could be more severe like chasing or biting another animal. And then we also look for something where there's a submission on part of the receiver. So they're saying, they're running away, or they're responding in some way to know that, yes, they did see that animal threaten them, and they're responding. Also involved are events that we call sparring, where one animal aggresses another and the other animal fights right back. So they could actually kind of, maybe chasing back and forth or lunging back and forth at each other, those types of behaviors.
I see. And this, now as far as the social hierarchy goes, how does the uncertainty of one's social hierarchy affect their health?
Yeah, so, in a group living species like rhesus macaques, they have this hierarchy where you have some animals that are at the top of the hierarchy. They're the ones that get preferential access to food. They tend to get the best spaces. And then you have these animals at the lower end that kind of get the leftovers. And they tend to also experience kind of unpredictable aggression from other animals. They're kind of the targets of aggression a lot. And this organization helps in social groups because it helps organize, you don't have to fight over food with everybody. You all kind of know, hey, that's the alpha male, make way for that animal. And a lot of research in this area has kind of looked at this idea of who's high status and who's low status. And the thing that we're looking at is a little bit different from that, because even though you might be high status, is your position perhaps more certain or more stable than other animals of a similar status? So maybe I'm high status, but somebody's challenging me for my position, or maybe I'm low status, but I'm trying to move up the hierarchy. And so we wanted to understand how that kind of nuance or that complexity of status that hadn't been looked at, how that might impact their health, because we could predict that having an uncertain position or not knowing where you stand in your group when this organization is so important in guiding how you interact with other animals, not knowing where you stand could be bad for you because it could cause a lot of stress. I approach an animal, are they dominant to me? Are they not dominant to me? Do I know what to do? Could they potentially bite me? And it could be a source of stress.
I'm curious to know, how do you know if an animal is uncertain of their social rank, of their hierarchy?
Yeah, so one of the things that's novel about this study is with some collaborators, Fuxing Si, he's a statistical physicist. He's come up in collaboration with Brenda McCowan, the head of our lab, with some novel network methods to look for things like this. So traditionally when you look at social status or rank, you just kind of look at all the dyadic interactions. So A 1 over B, B 1 over C. So A probably will beat C. And so you kind of look for these for these direct interactions, but what our method does is it does that inference. If A and C never interact, you might be able to infer or get some information through this indirect pathway because they both interact with B. And so there's this method called percolation and conductance. And what it does is it takes this network and it draws pathways to look at how consistently you can have that A beats B, B beats C, and A beats C. Or is it circular where C beats A in the end? You can look for these circular versus consistent pathways. So it's really looking at information flow through the network. How consistently are you getting the same direction of a dominance relationship? And that's really where the uncertainty comes in. So if you have through some pathways, A is dominant to F, but through other pathways you find that F is dominant to A, that's an uncertainty. There's something going on that relationship is somehow not settled. And I think one of the things that's interesting is it could be that animal is directly trying to go up the hierarchy, but also because of these indirect pathways, it could be that your friend is trying to go up the hierarchy, and that makes you less certain about your pathway, where you stand in your group if the animal's around you. So it's not always that you're trying to move up, but it could also be uncertainty in your local neighborhood. So there's a couple different ways you can get uncertainty. It could be you, or it could be those around you that are driving maybe local instabilities.
And what did you find when you found that an animal was uncertain about their social rank? How did that affect their health?
Well, it kind of depends on health outcomes. So we looked at a couple of different things. One of the health measures we looked at was levels of blood proteins that relate to inflammation. And so high levels of inflammation are a risk factor for a variety of diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and things like that. Right. Yeah. So we're looking for these biomarkers that might relate to diseases. And so what we found there is that it's not just your status or your rank. It's not just whether or not you're certain. It's an interaction of the two. So, for example, if you are an animal at the top of the hierarchy, general theory like human research and stuff might say, hey, you're doing pretty good.
Right.
But that's only true if you're at the top of the hierarchy and you have a certain relationship. Your position is kind of nice and solid at the top of the hierarchy.
You know that you're the top dog.
Yeah, and everybody agrees you're the top dog.
Right.
But if you're at the top of the hierarchy and your position is perhaps more uncertain, it could be that others around you are less certain, or maybe you're at risk of losing your position. Those animals showed some of the highest levels of inflammatory proteins and potential risk factors for disease. That is
so interesting. I mean, you'd figure if you were a higher ranking animal that you wouldn't have to worry about your health because you would have the access to the best food, the females to mate with, and it seems like your life would be pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's trade-offs. Yes, you do get a lot of good stuff. You get your pick often of the females, and you get a lot of the good food and the good space. When it's rainy, you get the nice dry spot, those types of things. But that there's there's perhaps some cost associated with it. You have to maintain that position. And if you're not doing a good job of maintaining it, or somebody's challenging you, that can cause a lot of stress. And we think this is an interesting parallel to humans. You know, you look at humans, people who are of high socioeconomic status are generally better off, and they measure this using things like income or education level. Generally, people of high socioeconomic status have better health than those of low socioeconomic status. Right. But not everybody. There are people who are at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum that don't have good health, and there are some at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum that do have good health. And so there's something more going on, and we might be able to not just look at some of these status issues, but look at some of the nuance and complexity that goes into status, because the certainty of your position is a part of your status. And so there's, we're hoping this is maybe a new way to look at some of these issues to maybe help us target those that are potentially more at risk.
Is there anything that surprised you in doing this research? Anything that you thought was particularly interesting or surprising to you?
I would say it was the interaction. You know, I'm in my background is as a psychobiologist. I study stress and coping, so I was expecting uncertainty is one of the most reliable stressors you can possibly find. Mm-hmm. But in this case, when I mentioned earlier, there was an interaction. So high status animals that have uncertain relationships have markers of poor health. However, if you're on the low end of the spectrum, those at the very bottom end of the rank, those that had an uncertain relationship or uncertain position actually maybe did just slightly better than those that had a more certain relationship. Wow. So it's not uncertainty in and of itself. It was dependent on where you are. And, you know, when you think about it after the fact, it can make sense. If you are certain that you're in a low position, that kind of stinks. You can't really expect much for your future. But if you potentially have the possibility to advance your position, that uncertainty might actually provide an opportunity as opposed to a cost.
Well, there's always hope for those lower ranking animals, I guess.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
So wow. So you actually, well, let me rephrase that. So lower ranking animals who were uncertain of their social rank fared slightly better than the ones with a higher rank who were uncertain of their social rank?
No, so they fared better than other low-ranked animals that were certain of their rank.
Got it.
So we're comparing low-ranked animals. If you were certain of your rank, you did worse than those who were uncertain of their rank.
Wow. Now that is mind-blowing.
Yeah, no, it was really, really interesting. And I mean, one thing, you know, when you do research, sometimes you'll find a finding in, you know, one health. You know, we looked at 3 different types of pro-inflammatory proteins, and often you'll find an effect for one and nothing for the others. And so I thought one thing that was really powerful about this is we seem to see the same effect in all 3 different proteins we looked at, which is also something that, you know, is surprising at times, that we really seem to be seeing something that's pretty consistent. And notably, this was really an effect that we seem to be seeing predominantly in the males in the group and not as much in the females. So we think that this might be due to the fact that the males have to fight for position. In this species, they leave their group and then they have to go fight for their position, whereas females in this species, they're kind of born into their families and they inherit their mom's rank. They don't really have to fight for their position. So we think that this status, certainty and uncertainty, may be more relevant for males, and that maybe something else might be more relevant for females, like their affiliative relationships or something when it comes to their health.
So that leads me to my next question. Is your study done? What do you hope to accomplish next?
Yes, so this is just the beginning of kind of the analysis of these data. We have a number of different things that we've looked at. So as I said, this is kind of the baseline phase. Some of the things that we did were permanent removals of animals from these social groups. We have some previous research that suggests that natal males who are high-ranking, so these are males that are usually they would leave their group at puberty and find a new group, but because we're in captivity, they stay in their group. And some previous research by our group suggests that they could contribute and be troublemakers in their groups because they have family support and they can get rank that they didn't really earn on their own. And so one of our thoughts was that removing these high-ranking natal males would improve the overall group health because you're kind of getting rid of these, I don't know what to call them.
Troublemakers.
Yeah, these troublemakers in a sense. And so one of our manipulations was to actually remove those animals, and we're hoping to now look at how their removal might ideally improve the health of everyone in that group. And there's something similar in with the females. So there was a paper also by our group that looked at what's called genetic fragmentation in the females. So if you have a female and she has kids and then they have kids and then all of a sudden the matriarch dies and, are the cousins really truly operating as a family? They're not quite as related. And so some of our groups have been around for so long that you're starting to see that situation where you have these little family fragments. And so the thought is maybe by improving the cohesiveness of these female families, we could improve the overall structure of the group. And so we're interested in looking at some of these manipulations to see if they would help the overall group health.
That's great. And your research project was I just have to mention this, was published in PeerJ,
yes,
which is a scientific journal.
Yes, and it's open access, and so it's available to anyone who would want to see it as well.
And you can actually click on a link on our website, which is cnprc.ucdavis.edu, to access that link. Jessica, is there anything else I didn't ask you that you feel would be important for the listeners of Monkey Talk to know?
Not off the top of my head, but actually, yes. The method that I mentioned earlier that's new, this percolation and conductance method, it is new, but we have made a package for R, and it's available on CRAN so that anybody who's interested in trying to apply this method to other species or other social groups can go ahead and find that on there and apply it to their own data set so that we can get some more information about how this idea of uncertainty might play out.
And how would they find that?
So in the programming R, they have a number of packages available on CRAN, which is the place that you go to get packages for that particular program. And it's also available on GitHub. And so I think we could probably provide links. And I think they're also cited in the paper with a link to in the references section.
Absolutely. Excellent. And that's all the time we have for you today. Thank you, Dr. Vandeleest.
Thank you.